Yamaha was not messing around with this sucker. Oh yes! The feelings and the emotions that it has given me are the reason I ride dirt bikes.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Dirt Bike Channel. I'm your host Kyle Brotherson and welcome to the full review of this 2020 Yamaha YZ250FX. If you're watching this video before June 15th of 2020, you can still enter to win this bike by going to my website, dirtbikechannel.com. If you're here after the 15th, then you'll just have to enjoy the review. Let's get into it. Let's get one thing out of the way. This is not a paid review. I bought this bike for full price and have enjoyed riding it. It's really interesting though, because if you just take a bike out for the afternoon, you don't get a full idea of what the bike is like. And I don't watch other people's reviews of dirt bikes. All the thoughts that I'm talking about here are my own. There are things that I've come up with because I've been riding the bike for months and months and months in many, many different locations and altitudes and different dirt conditions and different, locations all over. And every time I go out, I learn something new about the bike. And when you live with the bike and do maintenance on the bike for months, you get a pretty good idea of what it's like. And that is kind of the preface for this review. First things first, this bike was freaking awesome. In 2020, they updated a number of the things on this 250FX and it is amazing. I loved it. It wasn't perfect everywhere, and so this is kind of like one of those, your reviews are too long, boil it all down. I absolutely loved the bike. Anytime that we were going faster, like in second gear, fourth gear, that type of terrain, this bike was incredible. It gave me confidence to do things that I hadn't done before, especially when I'm alone. And it was consistently just confidence inspiring. I would get fast lap times on little tracks that I would go to. It was awesome. It wasn't perfect though, and we'll get into that. I don't really like this bike if the speeds are slow. We're gonna cover a bunch of that stuff, but just overall, they made a ton of improvements. I reviewed this bike in 2016, 2017 timeframe, and this one is much better in my opinion. This one was awesome. You can tell by the smile on my face. It put a smile on my face every time I rode it. In this video, we're actually gonna start with the great things, then we'll move to the good things, then we'll move to the needs improvement and the misses. One of the best things about this bike is it just feels like the front end is bolted to the ground. In fact, it feels like the whole bike is bolted to the ground, but in a good way. It's not like it feels heavy or sluggish. It's just that front end, this is a Kayaba SSS fork and it's valved a little bit softer than the motocross bike. I've got the clickers basically turned as fast as they'll go all the way out. And then I've adjusted the rebound as well. And it's amazing what choppy things it will soak up, but it just felt like that front wheel was magnetically controlled to the ground, which I loved. There's not a lot of bikes that do that. You can get bikes where the front end feels soft and it feels stable and it feels planted, but this one sometimes just felt like there was a magnet pulling it down to the earth, which was pretty stinking cool. Before I get too far into this, I just want to mention that if you want to support Dirt Bike Channel for free, you can use my links to Rocky Mountain ATV that are down in the description or on my website. If you go to dirtbikechannel.com, up in the upper right hand corner, there's a links. You click on that and it shows you a bunch of different links where you can support Dirt Bike Channel just by buying parts for your bike. So use my parts links and I would thank you very much. My family would be in debt to you. I've already talked a little bit about the fork, but what I would say is that it's just got this perfect combination of when the speeds are quicker, I'm talking like second gear, third gear, it has just the right amount of, travel in it and just the right valving where it just stays right there and you get a ton of traction and it just feels super planted.
Oh yes! Holy shizballs, dudes!
Not all the KYB forks are ones that I love, but the valving that Yamaha did in this one was very good. It was a high point for me. I'll talk about a little bit of a shortcoming of it a little bit later, but overall, if you're gonna do fast desert stuff, this fork is amazing. To date, I haven't had a bike that gave me more confidence in corners, more confidence in jumps, more confidence in drops and things like this. The bike just would instill confidence in me, and I was able to do things on this bike that I never attempted on any of my other bikes, which was really, really telling to me. That's one of the things I want, is a bike that inspires confidence. Some of the other bikes in this room that are outside of the shot don't inspire as much confidence in me as this one does. I would consistently get the fastest lap times of any of my bikes. So I have this little off-road track that I go to. I never really show it online, but I take my bikes there and I can do a lap there in about 1:40 seconds, maybe 1:38. And I'm very, very consistent on all my bikes, but I'm consistently just a few tenths of a second faster on this bike than even the bikes with more power. This bike is amazingly quick, and it's just consistent. It's awesome. Something else that is awesome is this motor. It revs to the moon, and it's really snappy. No, it doesn't have a lot of low-end torque, and yes, it can stall really easily. We'll get into that later. But the mid-range of this bike is just awesome. You can grab a fistful of throttle and it just chugs. It pulls harder than any of the other 250s that I've been on, and I've really, really liked that. It just rips and it pulls hard. It's got that snap to it, which was a real high spot for me on this motor. I just love the fact that you could click into second gear, click into third gear, and hang on to that thing forever. It's one of the things that makes a four-stroke awesome, is there's a little bit less shifting involved, because you can just rev that thing up to 12, 13,000 RPMs, and it keeps making power the whole way. For any of you out there that say, well, it's fast for a 250, no. This bike is fast. It doesn't matter 250, 450, 350, this sucker is fast, and I guarantee you, unless you're trying to climb some mega mountain or something, or you're in deep sand, you're gonna be just as fast, if not faster, on this bike than the current bike that you have. That's been my experience. This thing is just bloody quick. So now we're into the things that are good. Something good about this bike is they actually covered up the fuse block and electrical systems on this bike much better than they did in years past. The last time I reviewed this bike, it was all just kind of exposed right here. And now they've got it all covered up so it looks like it's actually meant to be there, and you don't have exposed, electronics or fuse blocks or things like that just right where they can collect mud. The brakes are good. They are Nissan brakes, and I'm not as much of a fan of Nissan brakes as I am of, say, like a Brembo or a Magura. But for whatever reason, especially, and I think it has something to do with the fork, I didn't really feel like a grabby sensation. I've got another bike that has these same Nissan brakes, my Beta, and the Beta seems like it grabs a little bit more. It's a little bit more grabby. I don't know why, but I do not have a grabby sensation on this front tire with these Nissan brakes, even though it's the same components as I have on the other bike. So there's maybe something there with the pistons, I'm not sure, or maybe it's just the way that the fork reacts, but the brakes were good for me. The rear brake was totally fine. In fact, I've never had any problem with any of the Nissan rear brakes. It's just the front brake where I want a little bit more feel. Let's talk about engine braking. I think the engine braking on this bike is pretty good. It isn't as drastic as a lot of the four-strokes. That's one thing that makes it kind of jarring for people to switch from two-stroke to four-stroke, is this engine braking sensation. But I don't think this bike has a lot of engine braking, and it was one of my high spots as I'm as I'm transitioning from two-stroke to four-stroke, basically every other ride, I felt like there wasn't a lot of engine braking on this one, which was a good thing. Let's talk about the app for a minute. The Yamaha Power Tuner app is easy to use, and it actually just connects to your phone every time the bike starts. You have to get it synced up to your phone and get the codes. You have to kind of pull some of your plastic off and get the password to your bike, to the Wi-Fi unit. But this app works a lot better than the GET ECU app that I've had in the past on other bikes. This thing actually just pulls up. It's easy to get on your phone. And another cool thing is it has an hour meter inside of it, and it's got a maintenance log. So you can kind of track your maintenance on your phone, on the app, know when it's time to do an oil change or whatever, or a suspension change, because you can log it all right in there. The one caveat to that is you need to be careful, because it tracks time a lot, because every time you start the bike or hit the starter, the counter is counting inside the bike for about 2 minutes or so. So you get extra time on the bike if you're just going to use that timer in your phone as your only means of knowing how long the bike has been running. But you can adjust your fuel ratios, you can adjust your timing right here, and you can copy other people's maps. So you can put a map in here and download it to the bike. They come with 4 maps. There's 2 hot maps and there's 2 mild maps. I didn't love the way the bike ran on the mild maps, so I left one of the main power maps as one of the maps that I was using, and I also tried out some other power maps, and I just kind of would toggle between two different power maps, which the app did really well at being able to adjust that. The map switch up here on the bike is really nice. It's easy because it's easy to tell which map you're on, because it's either no color, or when you're on map 2, it lights up really bright blue, and so it was super easy to use, and it's easy to tell which map you're on. Something else that was actually a bright spot to me was the clutch. So it's a steel braided clutch, so it's not hydraulic, but it actually has a really light pull to it, and it felt really, really good. In all the places that I took it, I never felt like the clutch was holding me back. It's got a really nice feel, really easy to pull, so that was cool. Okay, now we're on to some of the things that needs improvement. You notice I praised the fork at the beginning, because when you're going fast, the fork actually works really well. But when you slow down, like in first gear and sometimes even in second gear, and you're hitting a lot of choppy stuff, like right in a row, like let's say you've got a hill climb where there's a bunch of rocks everywhere, and it's just like slam, 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 and a bunch of square edges. This bike actually, even though I've got the fork trying to move as fast as it possibly can, it just doesn't get out of the way as fast as in fact, any of the other forks that I have. I have like 5 full-size bikes right now, and this one had the hardest time in its current state of getting out of the way. The only one that was worse was the Beta Race Edition, but we actually revalved that suspension because it was so bad. This one was really awesome in most places, so I didn't touch the actual valving. But there was just a lot of feedback in my hands when it gets really rough and really rocky. And so I would get a lot of feedback, I would get a little bit of deflection, and it was later on in my testing, it was when I got up into the mountain single track, when the speeds were slower. When we were out in the desert, it felt like it was just amazing, but when there was a lot of chop, this thing didn't handle the chop as well, and I'd get a little bit of feedback in my hands. So if you're gonna be riding this bike in slower terrain, you might end up needing to revalve it just a little bit softer.
So it's eye-opening because I'm just getting beat up coming up this trail.
The other thing that I think needs improvement, and maybe it's just the fact that it is a 4-stroke, is it just although the bike corners really well, when you're just trying to like dodge and change directions, you may be on a single track and you gotta like dodge a rock or dodge a root, you definitely have to muscle the bike around. It wants to go straight, and it's so stable that, and maybe this is just a compromise that they've made, but you do, if you take this bike and you ride it back to back with a 2-stroke, you'll notice it doesn't like to dodge as well. Yes, it corners like a dream if you've got a tight corner, but if you're just like trying to dodge something or whatever and just like smack it over, you have to kind of work it a little bit. And so that's just something to note that could possibly have a little bit of improvement. But again, with it being a 4-stroke, maybe that's just because the bike is just standing up a little bit more. Something else I think that needs improvement, I think it actually does need an hour meter. I'm a big proponent of having the manufacturers put hour meters on the bikes. I know KTM does this, Husky does this on some of their bikes. I think there actually needs to be an hour meter that is tied to your ignition or to your spark plug so that it's only counting when the spark plug is going. That would give us a more accurate representation of how many hours it's got, and we can more accurately, count our oil changes or piston changes or all of these different things. So I think it needs an actual hour meter. Something else that could use improvement is this kickstand. This is the stock kickstand that came on the bike, and it's got this big ugly spring here that you can see. I just don't like how big and external this spring is. It's just kind of a cheap way to do it. I ended up putting a Fastway internally sprung kickstand on there because my boot, when this was up on the bike, I had a pair of boots or a couple that would get stuck on this spring. It would kind of wedge in here and kind of trap me, and I didn't like that. The other thing is this foot pad here for this kickstand is actually a little bit too small, and it would just push into the dirt. You'll notice, if you can see, that Fastway kickstand has a much better foot pad, much bigger foot pad, and I think this foot pad just needs to be a little bit bigger. Something else I think could improve this bike is if it just had a little bit more of a close ratio transmission. They did a 5-speed on this, but it's the same transmission as what the Yamaha WR has. And while it works, and it's way better than having the motocross gearing, I just think that the first gear is a little bit too low. It's almost not usable. And then you've got kind of a bigger gap between second and third. So I just feel like if they change the gearing just slightly, and it wouldn't cost them really anything, they just kind of change the gear ratios to have a more linear inside of there, I think that would make the bike a little bit better. Something I'd like to see some improvement on is how easy it is to stall this motor. Now I know that 4-strokes are just kind of inherently like this,
4-stroke.
But I wonder if there's some things that they could do, maybe with flywheel weights or something else, so that in the low RPM situations that this motor doesn't stall quite so easily. Now I know you can install a recluse on that, but I'm not a big fan of having auto clutches on bikes, even though it is a good product. But I'm wondering if there's something they could do to actually make this stall not quite as prevalently. Something that needs improvement, I think, is the airbox design. Now, Yamaha is all in on the air scoop that comes right up here because they have the motor facing back or tilted backward. So they want the airbox up on top so that your air comes right down through in that way. But the airbox, I feel like there's just so much like grass and leaves and weeds that get right up here in the airbox, and I feel like it's on other bikes, all that kind of stuff debris can just kind of fall out. On this one, it gets trapped in there, and you see so much there. There is a screen on the airbox so to try to keep some of that stuff out. But then even just the little French toast style air filter, I just don't know about it. I feel like it picks up a lot of dust. I know guys say it doesn't get dusty but I swear it does. It just like scoops in here, and I get weeds and I get grass and I get like little seeds and everything all stuck up in here. I'll show you an image, and this is just after one ride where there wasn't a lot of dust. But I think this airbox design, I do like the fact that they made it toolless, so you don't need a tool. You can change the air filter without having any tools, but I just feel like there's got to be a little bit better way to do this, and maybe they can't figure it out when they're just going to do the motor that way. Something that needs improvement is the fuel capacity is just not enough. I'll roll in how much capacity it has right here because I've forgotten, but it's just a smaller tank. It's because your fuel tank can't come up high here because the airbox is taking that up. So the fuel tank is all right here in the main part, and then it drops down here below the seat as well. But it's just not quite enough for like serious off-road riding where you're going major long distances. You're gonna have to be carrying gas a lot of the time. Now, if it's just, if it's a desert race where you've got, 30 miles in between laps or whatever, it's probably gonna work fine. But a lot of the rides we go on are 50, 60, 70 miles, and we're packing gas even when we're on bikes that have larger fuel tanks than this one. So I think that's something that it needs to be addressed. Something that I think needs to be improved is this bike is significantly wider, especially right up here by the radiators, than any of my other bikes. It's a lot wider. It's as much as like 2 inches wider than like a KTM or a Beta in certain spots up here. So, and you do kind of feel that just a little bit. It isn't a drastic thing, but it just looks wide, and it is kind of wide. Another thing that could be improved is just lock-on grips. I put lock-on grips on this thing because I don't like the glue-on grips that come on some of these bikes. A lot of bikes now are coming with lock-on grips, and I prefer them. So I think that could be improved to have just a better grip that doesn't spin and is easy to change. And now let's get into the misses. This is where Yamaha whiffed on this thing, and they definitely need to do better. First thing is they need finger clickers up here on these forks. Now I know Kayaba, this is something that they do where, let's just get your screwdriver, but the problem is your bar is often directly over the clickers, and so it's really hard to get a screwdriver in there. I know you can get these stupid little things like this. Here's this little Race Tech, super tool to be able to get in there, but even this is hard to use. This has basically a little screwdriver head right there where you can turn that, but this is hard to use. Yeah, you can stick that in your pocket or something. Just give us a finger clicker, and then you don't need to have this little thing that's frustrating to use. Something that needs to be addressed is this bike is very slow to start, especially once it's hot. I'm not complaining about it slow starting when it's cold because whatever. I'm talking about when the bike gets actually hot and you're out on a ride. It is very slow to hot start, especially when it's in gear. Sometimes you'll crank on that bike for a second or 2 seconds before it'll fire. Now it does help if you have the mental fortitude and capacity to actually switch up to neutral as soon as you stop. So if you have one of these bikes, I do suggest that you get in the habit of, as soon as you stop, try to click up and find neutral, because then the bike will start much easier. And I have heard that there's an ECU flash or whatever that you can do on the bike that will make it start better. I didn't do that. I wanted to see if it would get better, and I think it did maybe get slightly better after about an hour of running the bike, but it was a constant struggle the entire time to get the thing started. Another miss, in my opinion, is it needs handguards. These are handguards that I put on that are aftermarket handguards. I'm okay with some of the flag style handguards that a lot of the bikes put on, like Beta and KTM and Husky. They'll put on a lot of their bikes just a real flimsy flag handguard, and that isn't very expensive. It doesn't add any weight, and I think this bike, being an off-road bike, probably should have something like that would just cover your bases. I'm looking at the two other bikes in here. They have flag style handguards that are just the stock handguards, and it's totally fine. The fact that I had to install this is kind of a miss. Another place that they whiffed is this engine guard. I'm not even going to call this a skid plate. This came on the bike, but it actually doesn't cover hardly anything. And we ripped this thing right off the bike by just doing some drops. We were doing some drops where we were dropping like down maybe 6 or 8 feet onto a downhill, and we were able to rip this thing right off the bike. It never was protecting the skid plate, and it wasn't really protecting anything other than maybe keeping some mud from coming up here and getting up on the motor. So it's like a mud guard, but that needs to be improved. If you're gonna put this on the bike, and some people are gonna be like, oh, it already has a skid plate. We tore right through this thing in multiple places, and it ripped and fell right off the bike. So that is a big whiff, and Yamaha, if you're gonna do something, just go all the way and actually put a real skid plate on there. I had to put this AXP skid plate on, which gave me coverage all the way across everything, including my water, my coolant lines, and the linkage. Be nice if that stock thing could have worked for that. One of the other misses is that this bike does not turn very tight. Now that may not be a problem if you're on a motocross track, but since this bike shares the same frame and front end as the YZ250F, you cannot adjust how tight this bike will turn. This bike was actually the second worst or second largest turning radius of any bike that I've ever tested. I haven't tested that many, but I've tested like 5 or 6, and this is the second worst one that I have. What that means is if you try to go on like tight switchbacks or something like that, or you have a really tight turn somewhere, you're gonna have to get off the bike and muscle it around. And sometimes that's just really, really annoying when you're in some of these tricky situations on mountain switchbacks. So I think that it would be nice if they would give this bike a little bit tighter turning radius. Maybe you don't need to do that on the motocross bikes, but if we shaved some of these parts up here, we could get this bike to turn a lot tighter, and that would make it a lot better.
So that pretty much wraps up the full review of this bike. You know what I should do? If you've already watched 22 minutes of a YouTube video, I should have like a little nugget in the end where you can like email me and I'll send you some sort of a prize. I can't effectively do that. But I just wanted to let you guys know this bike was awesome. I loved it. It especially was really, really good in the faster stuff. This is, you know, probably tied for my favorite 4-stroke ever between this and the 2019 Beta 390 RR Race Edition that I had, and picking between the two would be very, very hard for me. So the 2020 YZ250FX, I've got 2 big thumbs up as long as the speeds are faster, and if I could have a 2-stroke as my main bike, and this is my, you know, secondary, you know, change of pace bike, that's exactly what I would want. Because I can't have this as my primary bike because it doesn't do everything that I want. But if the speeds are higher, this thing is absolutely amazing, and I loved it. So sadly, it's going away to a new home here very soon, and most of you watching this will probably watch it after I've already given it away as a sweepstakes bike. Pay attention, because every once in a while we do these sweepstakes a couple times a year where you can win these bikes. And I think that's all I've really got to say. Love the bike. Leave a single track. Thanks.